from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
In January of this year, we celebrated at North Idaho College the 8th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Our guest speaker on this program, which is airing a little bit later than when we did it, we welcome to the program the Honorable Larry Eckelhawk. Mr. Eckelhawk became Idaho's 30th Attorney General on January the 7th, 1991, and he is the first Native American in the United States to be elected to a statewide constitutional office when he was elected in 1990. Our distinguished guest is a former member of the Idaho House of Representatives from Bannock County, and he also was elected Bannock County Prosecuting Attorney. He holds degrees from Brigham Young University, his baccalaureate degree, where he attended on a football scholarship and was named to the academic all-conference team. Upon getting his degree at Brigham Young University, he also received a Doctor of Jurisprudence in the field of law at the University of Utah in 1973. He has also done graduate studies in business at Stanford University. Our guest today has been recognized across the country for his distinction in the field of politics. Attorney General Eckelhawk was named one of the 20 people to watch in the West by Newsweek magazine, and he was pictured on the cover of USA Weekend as one of America's 10 most promising people in politics. The Attorney General has indicated to me that his most prized award came in 1991 when he was awarded the George Washington University's prestigious Martin Luther King Jr. Medal for his contributions to human rights, and that was in 1992. Attorney General Eckelhawk, it's a pleasure having you on our program, and we thank you for your participation in our 8th Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Thank you, Tony. It's very nice to join you today.
And I'm very pleased to have two panel members to join in the questioning and to help us in discussing the field of human rights. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho. And next to her is Jeannie Gibbons, a former member of the Idaho House of Representatives. And I shall ask Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Mr. Eckelhawk, as the keynote speaker at the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, what was the theme of your address to the students?
Well, what I was attempting to do in my address was just to set the tone of our commemoration of the Martin Luther King holiday. And I took this opportunity to share some personal experience. I think I have a lot of gratitude to Dr. King, because as a young man, being 15 at the time when I heard his famous speech delivered in Washington, D.C., I have a dream, that I was touched by that. And I think it's important for people to remember the contribution he made to us by giving us a vision of what we could become. And I also related the more recent experience I'd had in winning an election to a statewide political office, and the thoughts that I had that very evening that I got the vote returns, because I remembered back to the time that I first heard that message from Dr. King, and it was a significant point in my life that helped me to achieve what I have. And I simply want people to feel that major strides have been accomplished because of what Dr. King stood for.
Jeannie Gibbons.
Thank you, Tony, and welcome to North Idaho, Larry. It's always good to see you. You will agree that not all the work has been done in the area of human rights. While we do have federal legislation, we have the Voting Rights Act, we have equal employment opportunity, and the state of Idaho has passed a very good hate crimes reporting law and malicious harassment law, that there is some work that needs to be done. In Idaho, there is talk that there may be an anti-gay initiative coming before the voters, perhaps in the next election. similar to the one that was introduced in Oregon, and perhaps 10 more states will follow suit throughout the country. What do you think of that?
It disturbs me because I think, we can look at the experiences that occurred in both Oregon and Colorado recently and see that the initiative that was placed on the ballot was something that was dividing people. And I think that we don't need that in Idaho. I'm very hopeful that this bright idea that some people have, will kind of maybe fall by the wayside, because I would not like to see the division occur within our state if that initiative goes on the ballot. I think this cuts right to the heart of what Dr. King was all about in trying to bring people together and recognize that we have differences among people, but learn tolerance and acceptance. And aside from those kind of ideals that I speak of, we can look at the state of Colorado and see that it's having economic consequences. That people will not tolerate that kind of division to the extent of boycotting the resorts and businesses of that state, and I think that becomes very damaging economically. And I think that we in Idaho hopefully can dodge that bullet.
Thank you, Larry.
Attorney General Echo Hawk, I was at a breakfast this morning when the rabbi from Spokane, Rabbi Isaacson, talked about some of the things that you did and how he was also moved by the civil rights issues and movement in 1960s, in particular the speech, I Have a Dream in 1963. Mm-hmm. And he indicated that following that progress and those inspirations, that in the 70s and 80s, in fact, much of the time after the 60s, that we've often forgotten the most important lessons of that, the continual vigilance and continual activism. And this morning he was calling us to action again, that he felt we'd fallen into that pattern of saying we will only partially remember. I would like to get you to respond to that statement. Have there been in recent years setbacks, or have there been things that need to be done that simply have not been addressed as other issues were in the past?
Well, Tony, I just remember back to the era of the 60s when Dr. Martin Luther King gave his speech, and you saw action in the United States Congress, and people were playing an activist role, and we don't see that today. And in fact, I think although we saw a lot of activities through the 60s and early 70s, it has tapered off. And that doesn't mean that it's tapered off because all of the problems have been solved. I think that we still see a lot of pain that is being suffered by individuals because of discriminatory behavior and hateful feelings. And as long as that exists, there's work to be done. And I think there's a special obligation perhaps on people such as myself, and I'm sure Jeannie and others that have been particularly blessed through the efforts that were made by that civil rights movement. We are in a position today where perhaps we can do more about it. And I think because we've received a lot of good things in recent years, that we owe a lot to try to do what we can to teach the new generation about the dangers of discrimination and targeting people because of their differences and generating hate, and we need to do what we can to reverse that.
Janelle Burke.
When we talk about civil rights, we sometimes talk about the broad umbrella, and we are talking about a little bit of federal law and a little bit of state law and so forth. Could you, for the benefit of our viewers, sort of break that down into bite-sized pieces and show some distinctions between Idaho law and federal law, and where the laws come from, how our rights are protected?
Well, first of all, in the basic constitutional language, there are a lot of similarities between the Idaho State Constitution and the United States Constitution. And of course, the state court system and the state legislature is free to to impose some greater restrictions in the area of civil rights. But most of the work that has been done to advance the rights of people that are underprivileged or discriminated against has been done in the federal arena. And there are a number of laws on the books that were put there mainly in the 60s, and that's been where the activity is. That doesn't mean that in Idaho, you know, we can kind of rest on laurels and think that there's not much that we can do. And when the time comes that we need to take action, we need to do that. And we've got, I think, a pretty good record in recent years in passing our malicious harassment law. That was a step by state government to do something to protect the interest of people. We've already addressed the issue that may be coming up, and that is the, you know, the issue with the gay and lesbian people, and trying to do something in state law to stop any kind of recognition that there may be problems that the state may want to address, or local communities. And to me, that's the wrong way to go.
Jeannie Gibbons.
Thank you. You mentioned that you were blessed, we were blessed out of the 60s generation with a little bit of a boost from that Martin Luther King era, the civil rights movement. And I agree with you, the load is a little heavier. What do you think of, on a national level, some Native Americans have called on professional sports teams to change the names of their teams, like the Kansas City Chiefs and the Washington Redskins. They've called upon the Atlanta Braves to stop the tomahawk chop. How do you feel about that?
Well, I certainly understand, you know, where people are coming from when Native American people express their opposition to that. And we've got a lot of history in this country. You know, those names go way back for athletic teams, and some teams or some universities, like the school that I attended, Stanford University, changed from being the Stanford Indians to the Stanford Cardinals. And I think that there's a certain sensitivity that people need to be aware of. And you even see some states that, I know in Wisconsin recently, the state attorney general said that by law they ought to move away from those kind of names and change. I have not pursued that myself. There are a lot of Native American people that have, but I suppose my particular arena of activism has been within the court system, working as a tribal attorney, and in the halls of the legislature working with you, Jeannie. Back in 1984, we put some of the first ever laws on the books that were favorable to Native American people in the state of Idaho. And so I guess that's what you would expect from a lawyer, and a politician is working within that arena. But I have respect for the feelings that Native people voice when they say that they object to those kind of names.
You had referred earlier, Mr. Eckhart, to what we call oftentimes anti-hate crime laws, and there's been a package that's passed in the state of Idaho starting in 1983 with the Malicious Harassment Act. And I know Jeannie Gibbons was there when a number of those later laws passed, and you were there in those earlier days. But there is a real challenge that's taking place by a number of organizations and attorneys around the United States to, it appears, to strike down almost all malicious harassment laws. And we have the case recently from St. Paul, Minnesota, when the U.S. Supreme Court, I think, surprised some people with the decision it took. And I know that Wisconsin now, the state Supreme Court has also stricken that state's laws, and it's going to the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm giving this background not obviously for you, but for our audience. And I know you have been one of the attorney generals that has joined an amicus curiae in trying to protect those laws. I'm sure our viewers are very interested in the issue, and I want to give you a lot of leeway here to describe what is happening and what the issues happen to be and what you think the outcome will be.
Well, first of all, let me say that the malicious harassment law that we put on the books is not just there for window dressing. You know, it is a law that is needed, and we need only look to a recent incident that occurred in Boise, where a black family was in a city park and was approached and assaulted by a white man, And it wasn't just a physical threat that he presented, but with small children in the vehicle, black children, this man was yelling racial slurs. And when you have that kind of hateful expression coupled with a physical assault, that's what our laws in the state of Idaho were meant to address, to say that that particular kind of conduct should be punished as a criminal violation. In the state of Minnesota, a case arose before the United States Supreme Court where the way that ordinance was drafted, the members of the Supreme Court in the majority said that it goes too far when it infringes upon freedom of expression. This was alarming to state attorneys general across the country, and so we have sought to have that law reviewed through a Wisconsin and Ohio case, and the state of Idaho supported that effort, and we will file a brief to try to get that Minnesota ruling overturned. But within Idaho, we have a state constitution that will be interpreted by state justices, and in the case in Boise, we will be appealing that decision, which followed the Minnesota precedent. And we're intending to fight this thing as far as we can. If we need to modify our state statutes on malicious harassment, we will do so. If we need to take it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, we will do so. But I think this is a law that is worth keeping on the books, and we're going to do everything we can.
I know that you would join many other people in political life that you are also a defender of the First Amendment free speech, but what is confusing, some people who are working in this field of dealing with hate crimes, that it seems that the laws have been crafted, particularly Idaho's, that many of us are more familiar with, in making a clear distinction that hate groups can assemble. Hate groups can even, in those assemblies, express very offensive messages to others in society. But when they leave those gatherings and they actually take action, or they discuss in those gatherings, let us now go put this into action, and in their comments directed at a minority group, why is the court having such difficulty distinguishing between the speech and the illegal action?
Well, it's correct that a lot of people feel very strongly about the First Amendment, and I am one of them. But when you merge that expression with conduct that is aimed at damaging, and I'm talking about a physical type damage to an individual, then that is what the laws are seeking to punish. To say that that kind of activity is harmful to people, and we're going to draw the line there. And hopefully we will be able to point that out to the members of the United States Supreme Court so that they can craft a rule of law that will allow, to some degree, punishment of those people that go beyond just an expression of their view. We will support that in terms of their right to say what they want to say. But when they couple that with other behavior that threatens or physically harms people, then I think that's another matter.
I have one final procedural question about the panel, because I'm so interested in all this process. I believe there's over 20 states that are joining in this amicus curiae to try to uphold the law. Larry, do you all consult with one another in those states in preparing your briefs to a kind of concert to get those arguments before the court?
It will be a joint effort. The states like in Ohio and Wisconsin that will have a case appeal before the U.S. Supreme Court will be the ones that do the primary drafting of the briefs, and they will do the oral argument before the court. But we will join in a friend of the court brief so that some state will prepare that and other states will join in as a show of support. And I think this is important to the members of the U.S. Supreme Court to know where the elected state attorneys general across the country stand. And I think you'll see very strong support being demonstrated to try to get them to overrule the Minnesota case.
Thank you. Janelle Bird.
Like Tony, I'm going to have a multiple question, but we'll start with the first part. When you were elected as the Attorney General in Idaho, what hopes and dreams did you have for the office? This is a broader question. We've been talking specifically about civil rights, but now what hopes and dreams did you have for the office?
Well, I would say that throughout my political career, what fuels me and energizes me is just trying to do what I can in fulfilling my duties as a state legislator or county prosecuting attorney, or now as Attorney General, to make sure that the people of the state realize the same kind of opportunities and benefits that I received in growing up. I think that American dream, I speak of it often, that promise of America is very important for a person that comes from my background, where you see how these principles of law have helped to realize opportunity and achievement. Then you want that for all people. You want it for the elderly, you want it for people of all walks of life and economic status, to just enjoy the best quality of life that we can within Idaho. And the State Attorney General has responsibility primarily in law enforcement areas. And so I oftentimes will, you'll see me, like in the legislature this year, we'll be promoting bills that will address the protection of children from abuse, physical and sexual abuse. And we'll do things that we can to keep illegal drugs away from our school systems. And we'll do things to protect consumers from fraudulent actions. You know, all of those kind of things I see are damaging to the possibility of enjoying a very fulfilling life in this state. And I consider it a very high honor to be able to serve as Attorney General. But, you know, that's what energizes me.
Now, along that same line, within your office, you have different divisions. Can you give our viewers some idea of what kinds of areas the Attorney General deals with? It's a very broad area.
Well, I would say that you need only open the newspaper and see the major issues that we deal with in the state, and the Attorney General usually has a role to play. I've got, at last count, about 95 deputy attorneys that work in the various agencies and departments of state government. And so anytime the state of Idaho is involved as a government in some issue, then our office is going to be providing counsel to the state legislature or the governor or individual state departments. It can come in all kinds of forms. Probably the issue that has occupied more of my time than anything else has been on nuclear waste shipments into the state of Idaho from Colorado. We've been involved in 5 lawsuits since I started out as Attorney General. But, you know, water rights, the salmon issue, human rights, the issue we've talked about today involving the city of Boise and the incident in the park there. It can come in all forms, but just about any major issue in the state of Idaho, we're going to be involved, from reapportionment to, you know, counseling with legislators on legislation that they want to bring forward.
Jeannie Given.
We are in this new generation now. You and your lovely wife, Terry, have 6 children. You're the father of 6 children. And they have a totally different perspective on life than we did, of course, because they're this new generation. What are the lessons of human rights, the message of Martin Luther King? What do you give to this new generation?
You know, with your comment, Jeannie, you raise a concern, because I feel very deeply about these things that we're discussing today. And I fear that perhaps my children don't have that same frame of reference, the same feeling in their heart about these important things, because they didn't go through the experience I did. And that raises some alarm, you know, within me, because I think perhaps that's the case, you know, for other families. But I think that we always have to place a value on helping all people in our society to enjoy a quality lifestyle. And for anyone, you know, regardless of gender or age or race or ethnic background or religion, for whatever reason, if they are not fulfilling, you know, their greatest potential, then that ought to be all of our concern. I don't know if the message is getting across like it should. I was very pleased to participate in the Martin Luther King program in Coeur d'Alene when I saw about 1,200 elementary students there, and not just listening to a state attorney general talking about these things, but having them perform skits, give speeches, sing about the things that we're talking about today. Because I think more than placing a law on the book in the state statutes, it's that educational process that will truly make the difference for the next generation.
You so echoing what many people in the Cooney County Task Force on Human Relations have said for a long time, that it's in the field of education, and that organization is certainly very involved in the educational process because it's there is where the attitudes can be looked at and addressed. But in addition to that, what else would you suggest that we need to do that is lacking at this point and stage in creating a full realization of what many people that support democracy talk about concerning the principles of freedom and equality, and what can we do?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is most important is not just educating the individuals, but making sure we have that quality education system at all levels. You know, because to me that's what really made opportunity real for me. Doors were opened, but it was the educational opportunity that allowed me, you know, to get where I am today, and I want to see that continue. But we can look around the state and we can see incidents that occur that tell us that we still have problems. The incident in Boundary County involving the standoff, the incident in the Boise City Park, you know, people that carry weapons, that believe in violence. Anytime we see that kind of display, we recognize that there's still work to be done. And I think that people in communities have to be willing to devote some of their time and energy to organize and just make it, you know, not acceptable to have that kind of conduct go on. We've got to establish a community standard that says in absolute terms that we will not tolerate that.
Larry, on that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion, and on behalf of the panel and our staff and all the organizations that sponsored Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, thank you for being in Coeur d'Alene with us. I know it's airing in February, but we're doing this in January, and we invite you back.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Idaho's Attorney General Larry Eckelhawk, discussing human rights and also here for the celebration of the King Day. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time, when we will discuss what we believe to be an important issue and of interest to you. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.